Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
If you're a big snacker like me, you know finding a gut-friendly, gluten-free snack option isn't always easy, which is why you need to know about Paleo Valley. Their 100% grass-fed beef and 100% pasture-raised turkey meat sticks are not only loaded with delicious flavor, but they're also completely free from carbs and sugar. Plus, they're gluten-free, soy-free, dairy-free, GMO-free, and preservative-free. What's not to love? And now you can use my special coupon code GEN10 to get 10% off your order today. Simply go to their website, paleovalley.com, and enter GEN10 at checkout. That's JEN10 to apply a 10% discount off your entire purchase. Unsure of the link? Simply check out the show notes of today's episode to get all of the details. Once you try these meat sticks, you won't be able to get enough. Welcome back to episode number 139 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's episode, I want to share with you some interesting research that I recently came across connecting what are known as mast cells and rosacea. Just the other week, Dermatology Times published an article called A New Target for Rosacea Treatment, the Mast Cell. Towards the end of the article, the author specifically pointed out the most common food triggers identified by the National Rosacea Society, including high histamine foods such as yogurt, cheese, sour cream, soy, yeast extract, and chocolate. In some people, this additional histamine from food exposure can trigger mast cells to degranulate and release histamine. For people with rosacea, it seems to trigger an influx of mast cells as well as higher activity that's found in facial skin. This appears to be in line with other research that suggests that rosacea flare-ups could be the result of neuropeptide production that in turn, quote, induces cathelicidin production, end quote, in mast cells. The more I dig, the more research that I find connecting the dots between the destabilization of mast cells to the various symptoms associated with rosacea. And what's really interesting to me is that I get alerts daily about new drug therapies for rosacea. It's rare, though, that those alerts point at research like this, even though this information clearly exists in the literature and is being actively studied. So then why aren't we looking deeper than creams and medications to help people struggling with rosacea? Especially given that mast cell issues typically have an effect throughout the body. So what if rosacea flare-ups are a sign of something else going on in your body and not the ultimate problem? I can't say for sure, but it's certainly interesting food for thought, right? Let's hold up for a moment. You've heard me say the phrase mast cells a few times now, but you might not know what they are. A mast cell is a type of white blood cell that has a pretty big role to play in your body. A high concentration of the cells that ultimately create mast cells are found in your gut, specifically in your small intestine. Mast cells are found in both mucous membranes and epithelial tissue and are involved in, quote, allergy, asthma, anaphylaxis, gastrointestinal disorders, many types of malignancies, and cardiovascular diseases, end quote. Inside mast cells, they have these granules that act like little warehouses for a bunch of different inflammatory agents in your body that include, quote, histamine, heparin, a variety of cytokines, chondroitin sulfate, and neutral proteases, end quote. These substances are released when mast cells degranulate. Essentially, the granules open their doors to release what they hold within. When mast cells become increasingly triggered, you can find that you've become intolerant to histamines or you develop a condition called mast cell activation syndrome. If you've never heard of mast cells before, it's probably because this particular issue isn't a very mainstream concept yet. There's more research coming out on mast cells, but it can be difficult to find help. I initially learned about mast cells years ago when I stumbled across the work of a journalist named Yasmina who ran a website called healinghistamine.com. Though Yasmina has since passed away back in 2018, her website survives and has a lot of great information on it. According to a presentation that I sat in on at the Integrative Health Symposium back in February of 2020 in New York City by Dr. Ann Hayden, the following can trigger mast cells to degranulate: histamine exposure, lectins, gliadin, which comes from gluten, stress, which means both external triggers and internal stress triggers, toxins, certain drugs, heat or cold, lipopolysaccharides, also known as LPS, which are produced in the gut by exposure to certain saturated fats such as coconut oil, and also IgE and other non-IgE triggers. It's crucial for you to know that mast cell issues go beyond just allergy symptoms, as the previous list of their involvement suggests. Symptoms can be widespread and look like a very confusing constellation of random symptoms. As an example, mast cells in the gut can cause diarrhea when they encounter something problematic by increasing fluid secretion and peristalsis. And what that means is we get more water into the gut tube, so to speak, and we see this increase in undulations that push things through to get something out of your system. Other symptoms of histamine exposure from mast cells shared by Dr. Ann Hayden include fatigue, headache or migraine, nausea and vomiting, chills, hives, GERD, rashes, abdominal pain, diarrhea, constipation, anxiety, tics or tremors, burning mouth, depression, memory difficulty, hypertension, chest pain, feeling cold, or having the sweats, and the list goes on, and you can see why this could be difficult for a doctor to piece together. If you listen to the Healthy Skin Show sequentially, you might recall Dr. Leonard Weinstock. He talked about the high incidence of small intestine bacterial overgrowth, also known as SIBO, in rosacea patients. To connect the dots between mast cells, a 2019 study published by Dr. Weinstock found that almost 31% of people with mast cell activation had SIBO. While not everyone with rosacea has SIBO, it is worth reiterating just how prevalent having SIBO is. A small study published in the Journal of American Academy of Dermatology found that, quote, patients with rosacea were 13 times more likely to have SIBO compared with controls, end quote. And sometimes the bugs in the gut happen to produce more histamine than other bugs, depending on the makeup of your gut's microbiome. It might surprise you to know that there are some friendly gut bugs that naturally produce histamine, such as Lactobacillus acidophilus. And there are other not-so-friendly bugs that make histamine too, including Klebsiella oxytoca and Klebsiella ornithinolytica. These should not be confused with Klebsiella pneumoniae, which does not produce histamines. These unfriendly bugs can pop up on stool testing. I've seen a number of clients that appear to have histamine intolerance, but it turned out that a major factor was gut dysbiosis with bugs that were also producing extra histamine as well. One interesting final trigger. Yasmina mentioned that Demodex mites may also trigger mast cells over on her website. If you're interested in learning more about Demodex mites, Dr. Leo actually discussed them on episode 136 of the Healthy Skin Show in regards to resolving rosacea. Since I started out this episode mentioning that rosacea trigger foods also happen to be high histamine foods, I figured it was time to circle back on that point. I don't want to go too deep into the woods on this topic today because, as I'm sure you can tell, this could be a very long conversation. I do not consider myself to be a histamine expert, but it is something that many of my clients struggle with on a daily basis, whether they've got rosacea or even sometimes eczema. I'm going to be straight with you. A low histamine diet is really hard to follow for an extended period of time. And for some people, it's pretty difficult to follow, period. There are some foods that naturally contain more histamine than others, most of which are aged, pickled, dried, smoked, processed, or fermented. Canned foods are typically a problem as well. And there are fresh foods that just happen to have a higher histamine content, like avocados, spinach, tomato, pineapple, and spices. However, the bigger challenge is that if you really are sensitive to histamines, cooked food increases in histamine concentration the longer it sits after cooking it, even in the fridge. Freezing a freshly cooked meal immediately helps to stop this histamine production. But this is why I say a low histamine diet can be really difficult. So you can see why only addressing this from an elimination diet perspective may not be truly practical, especially long term. And given that other triggers are possible, it makes sense to look at this from a broader perspective. In the meantime, it may be worthwhile to check out some natural antihistamine support, such as quercetin, which helps stabilize mast cells and has antihistamine properties, nettles, which is an herb that has antihistamine properties, and diamine oxidase, also known as DAO. This is a supplement to help you break down histamine in the gut. Just be aware that DAO supplements are not the same as typical digestive enzymes and would need to be taken with your other digestive support, not in lieu of it. If you unfortunately have an allergy to pork or you avoid pork in your diet, be aware that DAO is typically derived from pigs. Now, obviously, these 3 suggestions are for your information. Before trying any of them, discuss them with your practitioner to make sure that they're right for you and will not negatively interact with something else that you are taking. And I think it's important to point out that mast cell issues can be complicated to say the least, and it may not be as straightforward as just following a diet to get your rosacea flare-ups to stop. Unfortunately, there can be a number of triggers that cause mast cells to degranulate. If you've already been avoiding the common trigger foods pretty religiously and still get flares, it's time to dig deeper. I hope this episode gives you some real food for thought about your rosacea. It can be incredibly frustrating to deal with and equally embarrassing. I'm excited to share more information coming up soon about histamine diets, as well as rosacea episodes from both a clinical perspective, but also from people going through this just like you. That's why it's important to share this episode with other rosacea warriors to help them find answers to what is driving their flares. If you've been struggling with rosacea, I'd love to hear your questions, comments, or experience over at skinterrupt.com/139. Leave all of your thoughts there. That way we can keep the conversation going. And before you head out for the day, make sure to rate, review the show, and then hit the subscribe button so the next episode lands on your mobile device without you having to do a thing. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.